I'd say a welcome also to the many people who we discovered are watching these talks and taking part in the retreat in some part on the internet. We're surprised at the number of people who've been tuning in. About 300, is it? Wow. 300 so far. That's within one day. So Bere Island is an attractive place, either virtually or really. Good. So we move today to the sixth stage of contemplation in the schema of Peter of Damascus. And he says that at this stage, after we have learned the habit of detachment, we move to what he calls the stage of strength. And by strength, he interprets the capacity to look on beauty, the beauty of created things, without passion. So without attachment, without desire to control, to possess, to own it. But by this he also means being able to look upon things we don't like or find difficult to accept without hatred. So it's finding a balance which is not a place of unfeeling or coldness. Detachment sounds a bit cold, and some of us reacted a bit to that yesterday perhaps. But I don't think detachment means that you are unfeeling or you're unconcerned, but it means this balance really of being able to look upon things as they really are without projecting onto them our own feelings either of desire or aversion, either attraction or reaction against. This is really, I think, what he means by detachment. And he uses this interesting expression, the habit of detachment, as if it's something that we're not going to just be detached in 1 week. This is something that has to be learned. It's one of those lifestyle lessons that need to be persevered in. You don't acquire it easily or quickly, and therefore it becomes a lifestyle in a sense, rather than just a technique or even an individual practice. It becomes something that permeates your mind and your feelings and your thoughts. So this is the way you react to everything that happens, everything that life offers you or throws at you. This is your default way of responding to them. This habit of detachment. When we look at meditation, I think maybe this becomes a little easier to understand. At first, when you're learning to meditate, it's a bit of an uphill struggle. It takes you time to develop a rhythm, a pattern of meditation as a practice in your life. And perhaps you start with some enthusiasm, and then you start twice a day, and you may even ask the question, can I meditate more often than twice a day? But after a few weeks or a few months, it begins to be once a day, or 3 times a week, or once a month, and then you have little surges of spirituality, and you find yourself doing it for a few more days, twice a day. So that's the learning process in anything. And we shouldn't feel bad about it, we shouldn't feel guilty about it. This is how we learn. We all learn differently, but we all have to learn the same thing. And then eventually it does become a good habit. Good habits are more difficult to acquire than bad habits. And the best way of dealing with bad habits is to acquire good habits that push the bad habits out of the picture little by little. So focusing upon the acquiring of a good habit is more useful than concentrating upon our sins, upon our bad habits, and feeling bad about them. So just that little phrase says a lot, I think, the habit of detachment. And it becomes, therefore, not just an extra thing we are doing, it becomes a characteristic of the way we live, the way we feel, the way we respond to people, the way we deal with our positive feelings of attraction to something or someone, or our negative feelings of aversion to something or someone. We all have those positive and negative reactions, and we try to control them. And usually, in civilized behaviour, we don't. If we find somebody not very attractive, we try to treat them nicely, hopefully, until we maybe find ourselves in an impatient mood or in a bad space, and we find it comes out. It's in a way we wish it hadn't. But this is learning a habit of finding this middle space, this centre ground. And to try to explain this, so that we can understand it better, he speaks about three kinds of thought. The first he calls human thought, which is where we form a concept, an abstract concept of someone or something. Then there is what he calls the demonic thought, which is where this conceptual image is compounded with passion. So what he means by that is you have this idea or image in your mind of someone, for example, but it becomes attached to a passion. Remember, passions are disordered emotions. Anger, lust, pride, envy, greed, and so on. So these negative states of mind, the 7 deadly sins as they came to be called, which form a part of our mental behaviour, our mental operations. We all have these seeds of anger or desire or jealousy or pride. We all have these seeds within us, and they can be germinated by particular circumstances. Somebody just triggers something in us, or a certain type of person, or a certain type of anxiety, a certain type of insecurity, and we find ourselves suddenly dealing with this germinated seed of anger or whatever it may be. So a demonic thought, in his language, is when an idea we have in our minds becomes caught up with one of these negative states. And then he says the third kind of thought, so this we might say the third kind of responding to reality, is angelic thought. And this is where we are able to look upon things as they really are, without projecting negatively or positively onto them. And this is the beginning of spiritual knowledge, this deeper kind of knowledge that we've been coming back to many times. And spiritual knowledge, he says, is always arising from the centre of our humanity, or that point of integration or wholeness, the best part of ourselves, we might say, where we feel balanced and integrated, and we're able to hold the different forces, aspects of our personality in balance. It's a different kind of balancing act for all of us, because we're not all composed of the same elements, or in different proportions. But spiritual knowledge is the result of, or the condition of, being in this state of balance, which has an element of self-control in it. You know, if you know that you are an angry person, a person who's likely to fly off the handle, or an impatient person, or somebody who becomes very possessive of your friends, and you get very anxious if your friends seem to be, not in your possession, then that's something through self-knowledge you come to know. And that's an aspect of your personality that you will probably have to be conscious of and on your guard against until you get canonized. So it's going to be there. Don't expect it suddenly to disappear because you're meditating, even if you're meditating twice a day for 20 years. Particular tendency or weakness, you maybe have a weak knee or a dodgy arm or a certain chemical imbalance or diabetes or something. It's something you have to live with and be conscious of and take necessary precautions against. So again, we come back to this idea of wholeness and health of soul, which is not the same as perfection. So we're not aiming at perfection, but really at this balancing act, which is a dynamic understanding of the spiritual journey. I think this is what you see in Peter of Damascus's schema of the stages of contemplation, something quite dynamic and interactive, not static and acquisitive. Now, as a result of this true vision, as he calls it, and finding our own centre, getting ourselves sorted out, we use different language for this. Today we might say we might go to a therapist in order to rebalance ourselves after a trauma or deal with something that's coming up from the past, or we want to, or we may take some time off in order to find out what we should really be doing with our lives and so on. These are actions we take in order to rebalance ourselves. The words he's using are words like being without passion, or coming to true vision, or seeing things as they really are. And one of the consequences of this, in his understanding, is that we learn to look on humanity with wonder. To look on humanity with wonder. And that's a very real sign or stage of our journey into contemplation. When we realize that it's not only God who is a mystery to us, but we are a mystery to ourselves. And that as we come to know ourselves with this spiritual knowledge, that means not only psychological self-awareness, but this knowledge of being who we are in God, then we look on ourselves and upon all other human beings with a sense of wonder. Wonder is this condition of knowing in a state of unknowing. It's almost knowing that we can't know it, but we do know it at the same time, meaning that we can't define it or understand it rationally fully. And this condition of wonder at the human condition, he says, increases our capacity really for compassion. It enables us to identify with everything that is there, with all the people we meet, with the different conditions or the different personalities, even the ones we don't find easy to put up with, or the people who irritate us. Again, we may have to exercise some self-control over those temperamental traits, but deeper than those personality traits is this experience of seeing with a contemplative vision, seeing people, whether it's in their suffering or in their struggles or in their ordinariness or in their joys, seeing them in this way and identifying with them. One of the Desert Fathers says that the monk is someone who sees himself in everyone and everyone in himself. So you could put meditator in that instead of monk, and I think you'd see what it means. It's this capacity for empathy, but also actually more than empathy. It's really about understanding that our own identity is not separated from other people's. That we actually find ourselves flowing. It's a much more dynamic understanding of the self, not just an individual labelled individual entity called me, with my own social security number, and my own passport number, and all the individualized aspects of our social identity. But actually, at this deeper level, I am, rather like the beginning of the great I am of God, is inclusive. It doesn't define itself by pushing other people away, but it finds itself in this flow of relationship. We are basically in relationship. So this is a direct result, he says, of this feeling of wonder, which we may find ourselves experiencing or become aware that this is developing in us because of the way we react to people. We may find that we are more patient with people who normally tick us off, or we are more able to listen and to pay attention to other people with greater sincerity. We really can listen, and we're not immediately projecting our own experience or our own thoughts onto those people. So that's how we may become aware of this. This is not something abstract. This is something we experience in our relationships. And as Father John often said, when you want to evaluate your meditation, how is it doing? Don't judge the meditation itself, what's happening in my meditation. Because then you'll be constantly writing in your journal, good day, good, bad, bad. And you'll be looking for certain experiences, and the more, of course, you look for them, the less available you are for being in those, for being there. It's like with Adriano was downloading these movies in the house, and I think it's taking up a lot of the memory or the energy of the broadband. So if you're doing your email or something, it takes longer for the email to open, and so it's I had that one. I had that tune on mine. It's a Brazilian one, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. What is it?
Never on a Sunday.
Oh, is it? Oh, Never on a Sunday.
Oh,
it's not. I had a Brazilian one. So in the same way, our own available consciousness can be a lot of that available space or available memory can be absorbed in our own self-consciousness, our own self-reflection, and not available for direct experience. Remember how much this idea of contemplation is about seeing directly, being present, actually being with the person. You don't get this lapse of consciousness in communication or between you and the thing or the person you're conscious of. There's much more direct and spontaneous, and not less conscious for that. So this is what he means, I think, by being able to look on other human beings with a sense of wonder. But at the same time, he says, we are finding in ourselves a new capacity, which is a capacity to be absorbed in God, who is formless and imageless. So here is contemplation in action, or the fruits of prayer as part of our daily life. We find our human relationships truly enhanced or deepened or blessed by this contemplation. But we also are more and more conscious of the pure being of God, if you like, which is beyond all forms and all images. Our capacity for divinization. The whole of Christian thought, the meaning of life is divinization. It's when we say that it's about the vision of God, we have to be clear really what the vision of God means. Contemplation is the vision of God. But does the vision of God mean that we're all packed into some huge cosmic cinema and God appears on the screen or on the stage and we all sit there for eons upon eons upon eons looking at God on his throne, surrounded by archangels, angels, saints, popes, archbishops, bishops, priests,
not the rest
deacons,
of us,
religious, and monks, just one little step above the rest of you. So some of you are allowed up occasionally to dust an angel's wings or something. So this is the the Renaissance, beautiful Renaissance paintings of the angelic orders and the beatific vision. But I mean, secretly we think, perhaps I'd rather come back to Earth. It'd be much more fun down here after at least a few eons of this. So, but that's if you examine what this divinization means, the vision of God means. St. John says, we do not know what we shall be like. So here's the unknowing. But, there's always this but. We do not know what we shall be like, but we do know we shall be like him because we shall see him as he is. So this is the kind of transforming vision by which we are transformed into what we see by the seeing of it. This is a different kind of vision. It's not a dualistic vision. It's not me looking at the screen or us looking at God enthroned on his stage. And this is beautifully expressed in Thomas Aquinas's idea of the elements of the vision of God. He says, first of all, the vision of God consists in seeing perfectly, which is what Peter of Damascus keeps coming back to. Seeing things as they really are in themselves, rather than projecting our own desires or aversions onto them, rather than filtering reality through our own psyche. So seeing perfectly. Then he says it's perfect praise. It's an interesting phrase. Again, the language has to be unpacked, because perfect praise might mean something that I'm just not in the mood for perfect praise today, thank you. Or you go to a very clap-happy kind of religious service. It happened actually not long ago. I was at an interreligious conference, and at the weekend the Jews who were there very generously and sincerely really wanted to share their Shabbat with us, the Friday meal on Saturday. And but it was not very successful. because it was very difficult to communicate their love, which was perfectly genuine and sincere, and their pleasure and joy in the rituals and the psalm singing and the talking and all the things they did, to communicate that to a mixed group, especially after 6 hours or 7 hours of talking all day. So it was for them it was perfect praise, I think, because it was very close to it was very genuine, and they really enjoy Shabbat, but it really didn't turn the rest of us on. In fact, it turned quite a few of us off. So perfect praise is not automatic, it's spontaneous, rather than something that can be transmitted mechanically or demanded. You can't demand someone to feel perfect praise. And, maybe you try and smile and pretend to be enjoying it, but your heart isn't in it. So perfect praise is when your heart is in it, when your heart really is opening with wonder and gratitude and spontaneous praise. It's quite rare in religious terms that we ever actually feel that. And that's why we should never be critical of other people's way of prayer, because people may come to this perfect praise in different ways, through different devotions or different methods. So anyway, perfect praise, meaning that spontaneous and delightful experience of gratitude for the gift of being. Let's put it like that. Then he says the third element of the vision of God is the satisfaction of all desires, in the experience that God is the culmination, the consummation of all human need and desire. So actually it's beyond our imagination. We can't really imagine or anticipate what full satisfaction of desire would be like, because we identify only certain particular desires at any one time. What do you want now? You might say, well, I want to have lunch, I want to be happy, I want to be healthy, I want this problem to be solved. We identify individual desires which we focus on in the short term, maybe some vague long-term ones. But the idea of a full and simultaneous satisfaction of all our needs and desires is really beyond our imagination. It has not entered into the heart of man to imagine what is this, as St. Paul says, what this state of satisfaction, fulfillment really means. And then he says, finally, the vision of God means a community of supreme delight. And by this he means that I look on you and I'm aware of your happiness. And that makes me happy. And you look upon me being happy that you're happy, and that makes you happier. And because I see you more happy, because I'm happy that you're happy, I become more happy until we just fall on the ground exhausted. We're just so happy. So this is really what I think the divinization means. This is the beginning of this destiny of the human being in the Christian vision. This is what life is about. And the beginning of it is contemplation here. The vision of God here, in this life, and preparing us for higher and higher, deeper and deeper levels of fulfillment. And it's this quality of detachment, of being able to look at beauty without passion, without aversion or attachment, that fills us with love for the Creator. So it's when you can see things or people in their true nature, and you yourself are centered without attachment or hostility, then the love of God begins to flow. You begin to feel this love of God quite naturally. Quite a nice passage here where he speaks about this, I think. By thus contemplating dispassionately the beauty and use. So this is also looking at the use of things, the practicalities of life, or the technology of life as well. Of each thing, whoever is illumined is filled with love for the Creator. Thanks. Is filled with love for the Creator. So you don't have to try to love God. Just put yourself in the right space and practice the right level of detachment with the right kind of way of seeing things, and this love of God will arise in you. But don't try to love God or feel this love of God too much. This person surveys all visible things in the upper and lower worlds, the sky, the sun, the moon, stars and clouds, waterspouts and rain, snow and hail, how in great heat liquids coagulate. Imagine what he must have been looking at from his cell. Thunder, lightning, the winds and breezes, and the way they change, the seasons, the years, the days, the nights, the hours, the minutes, the earth, the sea, the countless flocks, the four-legged animals, the wild beasts and reptiles, all the kinds of birds, the springs and rivers, the many varieties of plant and herb, both wild and cultivated. He sees in all things the order, the equilibrium, the proportion, the beauty, the rhythm, the union, the harmony, the usefulness, the concordance, the variety, the delightfulness, the stability, the motion, the colours, the shapes, the forms, the reversion of things to their source, permanence in the midst of corruption. So, what a hymn for the modern environmentalist. How important it is then to develop this contemplative vision, to find the love of the world. This is the love of the Creator expressing itself directly in the love of every aspect of the material world of creation. Contemplation of nature is the first stage in the mystical theology of our ascent to the contemplation or vision of God. It fills us with wonder, a sense of delight and of gratitude. And it is this, he says, that prepares us for the greatest of all wonders, which is the wonder of the Incarnation. Remember what he said yesterday as the beginning of the fourth stage. It consists in the understanding of our Lord's Incarnation. But this is the context in which this understanding develops. We understand the incarnation of the Lord in the context of our love of the world and our affirmation of the beauty and the wonder of everything that exists. And it's spiritual knowledge that allows us to see all of this, to see that nothing in creation is evil. Even what is against God's will is miraculously changed by God into something good. Well, that's quite a daring moral statement. It's a moral conclusion from this experience of contemplation. He hasn't so far really been saying you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to obey these moral rules and those moral commandments. Although he comes back to that in a moment. But he says, go for the contemplative vision, because you have a capacity for that, and that's what you're actually programmed for and designed for. So go for that, and then he said you will begin to see what goodness really means. The goodness is not just obeying certain rules and regulations and winning the approval of your imagined God or of your authorities in your life, but goodness is something inherent in the existence of things. So God saw all that he had made and saw that it was very good. And it's from that goodness that healing comes, that restoration comes, that allows disaster or tremendous loss to be transformed. Amazingly, miraculously, in fact. And he does say this, it is miraculous. And anyone who has experienced going through a real dark night of loss and emerging after a period of time into a new space with a new sense of self and a new vitality for life, knows that it is kind of miraculous, because you can't really rationalize how it happened. There was just something of the inherent goodness of existence, God's goodness in you and in other people and in the world around you, and in all the healing arts that perhaps you were being helped by, friendship and therapy, or whatever it was that helped you. Through all of those things, this inherent goodness of existence, of creation, brought you through, put you right, and it actually expanded your capacity for life, amazingly. Yeah. So spiritual knowledge, he says, does not mean omniscience. It doesn't mean you know everything. You have memorized the court telephone directory. But it means that you can admit on every occasion, I don't know. That there's something I don't know or I don't understand. That's a sign of spiritual knowledge that you have. He says this humility, something that scientists have. The more scientists amass information and data about things, the more they know they don't know. And so a good scientist is always going to surprise you by focusing more upon the horizon of knowledge that he's aiming at, rather than what he's got in the foreground of his research. He's always going to be looking ahead. So. And saying I don't know is actually a positive thing. It's not negative. It's an affirmation that you know enough to be able to say I don't know it all, but I have a capacity to expand this knowledge, or expand myself, in fact, to infinity. And how much more peaceful we feel when we can do that, when we don't feel, as so often happens in modern business or in maybe modern education, we feel that saying I don't know is a sign of weakness or inferiority. It's putting us at a disadvantage. In corporate life, you don't go around saying I don't know. It's you pretend to know, and then you go and look it up on Google. So, but being able to balance what you know with what you don't know, and admit what you don't know, this is a sign of a peaceful mind, and also a centered and integrated mind. So he warns us, don't think that you know before you do know. Don't, well, we could put this another way, don't feel you have to pretend to be better than you are or more knowledgeable than you are. Just be yourself. This again is an aspect of self-knowledge. And then he says, you know, knowing that you don't know everything, you can continue to practice the commandments of Christ and proceed undistracted through the various stages of contemplation. So just keep, what Father John would say is, stay on the way. Don't don't worry about evaluating your progress, but just be faithful to being on the way. So, I think we'll conclude there, and we'll take our time for meditation, and then we'll have, I'm afraid I've forgotten my New Testament, but we'll have another short lecture session in our small groups after the meditation. So if you'd like to, let's stay quiet as we prepare for the meditation, which is where this conceptual image is compounded with passion. But what he means by that is you have this idea or image in your mind of someone, for example, but it becomes attached to a passion. Remember, passions are disordered emotions. Anger, lust, pride, envy, greed, and so on. So these negative states of mind, the 7 deadly sins as they came to be called, which form a part of our mental behavior, our mental operations. We all have these seeds of anger or desire or jealousy or pride. We all have these seeds within us, and they can be germinated by particular circumstances. Somebody just triggers something in us, or a certain type of person, or a certain type of anxiety, a certain type of insecurity, and we find ourselves suddenly dealing with this germinated seed of anger or whatever it may be. So a demonic thought, in his language, is when an idea we have in our minds becomes caught up with one of these negative, or not just an extra thing we are doing, it becomes a characteristic of the way we live, the way we feel, the way we respond to people, the way we deal with our positive feelings of attraction to something or someone, or our negative feelings of aversion to something or someone. We all have those positive and negative reactions, and we try to control them. And usually, in civilized behaviour, we don't. If we find somebody not very attractive, we try to treat them nicely, hopefully, until we maybe find ourselves in an impatient mood or in a bad space, and we find it comes out. It's in a way we wish it hadn't. But this is learning a habit of finding this middle space, this centre ground. And to try to explain this so that we can understand it better, he speaks about 3 kinds of thought. The first he calls human thought, which is where we form a concept, an abstract concept of someone or something. Then there is what he calls the demonic thought, which we look at meditation, I think maybe this becomes a little easier to understand. At first, when you're learning to meditate, it's a bit of an uphill struggle. It takes you time to develop a rhythm, a pattern of meditation as a practice in your life. And perhaps you start with some enthusiasm, and then you start twice a day, and you may even ask the question, can I meditate more often than twice a day? But after a few weeks or a few months, it begins to be once a day, or 3 times a week, or once a month, and then you have little surges of spirituality, and you find yourself doing it for a few more days, twice a day. So that's the learning process in anything. And we shouldn't feel bad about it, we shouldn't feel guilty about it. This is how we learn. We all learn differently, but we all have to learn the same thing. And then eventually it does become a good habit. Good habits are more difficult to acquire than bad habits. And the best way of dealing with bad habits is to acquire good habits that push the bad habits out of the picture little by little. So focusing upon the acquiring of a good habit is more useful than concentrating upon our sins, upon our bad habits, and feeling bad about them. So just that little phrase says a lot, I think, the habit of detachment. And it becomes, therefore, I should say, a welcome also to the many people who we discovered are watching these talks and taking part in the retreat in some part on the internet. I was surprised at the number of people who've been tuning in. About 300, is it? Wow. 300 so far. That's within one day. So Bere Island is an attractive place, either virtually or really. Good. So we move today to the 6th stage of contemplation in the schema of Peter of Damascus. And he says that at this stage, after we have learned the habit of detachment, we move to what he calls the stage of strength. And by strength, he interprets the capacity to look on beauty, the beauty of created things, without passion. So without attachment, without desire to control, to possess, to own it. But by this he also means being able to look upon things we don't like or find difficult to accept without hatred. So it's finding a balance which is not a place of unfeeling or coldness. Detachment sounds a bit cold, and some of us reacted a bit to that yesterday perhaps, but I don't think detachment means that you are unfeeling or you're unconcerned, but it means this balance really of being able to look upon things as they really are without projecting onto them our own feelings either of desire or aversion, either attraction or reaction against. This is really, I think, what he means by detachment. And he uses this interesting expression, the habit of detachment, as if it's something that we're not going to just be detached in 1 week. This is something that has to be learned. It's one of those lifestyle lessons that need to be persevered in. You don't acquire it easily or quickly, and therefore it becomes a lifestyle in a sense, rather than just a technique or even an individual practice. It becomes something that permeates your mind and your feelings and your thoughts. So this is the way you react to everything that happens, everything that life offers you or throws at you. This is your default way of responding to them. This habit of detachment. When